So we all know the best revenue teams don't just hit quotas, they consistently outperform the competition by building a culture of excellence. That's why I'm especially excited with this panel of killer leaders we have at different stages, from high growth startups to scaling mid-market companies to publicly traded enterprises. Each of these leaders have kind of their own perspective on driving and building that culture of excellence, and a unique perspective on how to scale out high performing go-to-market teams. First, we have James, CEO or CRO of ZoomInfo, scaling over $1 billion of revenue while transforming their offering recently, building AI native tools like Copilot and other impactful solutions. We have Kyle Norton, CRO of Owner.com, Toronto native as well, who's built from the ground up pretty much every aspect of the go-to-market team at Owner, from sales, partnerships, onboarding, demand generation, revenue ops, enablement. And we, last but not least, have Matt, CRO and now acting president at SEON, who's continued to break revenue records and solve some of the most challenging technical problems around fraud and financial crime while scaling the company. So all you, I'm sure you have a million other things you could be doing today. So thanks so much for taking the time to share some of your learnings and perspectives with the community today.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, first, I'm going to pass the mic over to James, because everyone knows that, AI is the top of mind for everyone and how it's transforming the way that pipeline gets generated and deals get done today. How do you see the balance between AI and this craft of sales, especially at market, and that intersection? Curious to get your take on kind of these colliding worlds that we have here.
Yeah, well, Ross, thanks for having me. I think it's one of the most popular questions asked in go-to-market. When is there going to be an army of AI agents doing everybody's job? I think, the way I would best articulate where we're seeing AI be successful, it's really around the ability to amalgamate huge amounts of data that would have taken reps a very long time to do. And I think, being a revenue leader over many years, there was always this concept of you have your best 5 or 10 reps or your best 1 rep. And it's like, what does Ross do that's so different? And the conversation was always, how do we replicate Ross? How do we replicate Ross? And that was always an impossibility, because typically Ross would be doing all kinds of homework at night, would be, doing that additional research, reading 10Ks, reading 10Qs, reading press releases, and just having this level of understanding that, frankly, 80% of your sales team wasn't going to do. They're not wired that way. And as many people as you try to hire, it's just not going to happen. And I think where we really see AI changing the game in sales is what used to take a go-getter like young Ross going the extra mile, spending his nights and weekends doing that additional work. Now that can be summarized and served up in an instant. And I think that is the biggest unlock, where if you think about going into an enterprise account and having the entire buying committee and knowing what they said on their last earnings call and knowing, who's new in the executive committee, who just got hired from a previous champion, that amount of data would have taken 10, 15, 20 different screens, going into Google, going into LinkedIn, going into SEC filings. 9 times out of 10, that work doesn't get done. Now it can be summarized in an instant. You can tune that to what's most important to your ICP, to what's most prevalent to your product, and you can have that information served up with like a morning cup of coffee. So I think that is a very real use case where we're seeing a lot of success. I think, where some of it's just noise, and we've been working on an AI SDR. That is where I think that art, science, and like the real salesmanship, for anybody that's tried an AI SDR, fun fact, it starts out, it has to say, it's from an actual compliance standpoint, you have to say it's an AI SDR and press 2 if you want to opt out. Our point of view is you're going to get 99.5% just opting out immediately, and then you no longer can contact them. And so I think some of those visionary promises are probably a bit further out. And so I still think you need a salesperson that can be delivering the value proposition tuned specifically to all of that information that now can be summarized. But I think from a discovery standpoint and just really hearing what the customer wants and building that relationship, I think as we've seen in a digital e-commerce world for now, well over a decade, you still have customers that want to have a relationship with the person. They want to be able to reach out. They want a level of support. And that's a sliding scale in terms of how much support, but I think it's been made very clear that they still want it. And so, I think just to finish the thought, I think there are several AI use cases that are tremendous to making more sellers better at their job. But I don't think we've necessarily hit that point where AI can do the job of selling to a prospect, building a relationship, building that trust, being a partner. AI is not there yet.
So basically what you're saying is it's a tool for people to get better and maybe have the best be able to do more work, but it's not going to replace kind of the core premise of especially that kind of upmarket sales motion.
That's my take, at least.
Yeah. Well, curious. I could share my thoughts, but I'm more interested in hearing Kyle's and Matt's on this. So maybe Kyle, to start, how does that kind of map to your way of thinking about using AI across your team and your experience with that?
Quite resonant. Yeah. My framing is slightly different, especially being in a high velocity SMB environment. But largely, I think AI and the way that we're trying to apply it today and how I see it over the next few years is really about helping sellers do more selling and obfuscating a bunch of the other work that is non-revenue generating, filling in Salesforce fields, doing data entry, pre-call prep, like James is talking about. I think a lot of those activities add marginal value, and we're really focused on using AI to try to pull as much out of the reps day to day as possible. The handoff between sales and onboarding into CS is another really important area of opportunity. So we're really applying AI internally. I agree with James. I think the promise of AI SDR is overstated for sure for calling. I think that might be regulated in a way that it might never really work.
Yeah, no thanks on that one.
Yeah. And even for email, I mean, I think there's some experts that do a great job with it, but 98% of the time, AI outbound is pretty generic. It produces an exciting sugar rush pop at the beginning because you're skimming the high intent from carpet bombing your entire market. But largely it hasn't been proven to be done in a very sustainable way outside of some very sharp practitioners who are really savvy growth marketers. So I think James and I have a pretty similar view.
Totally. And to round us out, Matt, any things you agree or disagree with there and your experience using some of these tools?
Yeah, broadly agree with James. I think it's optimizing for productivity, like some of the hard work, the homework, like, territory discovery, like quarterly business planning, account mapping. The promise of AI hopefully is to make sellers better at, selling and have them spend more time in front of customers and less time doing research in the background. As far as replacing the seller, I think we're probably a long way away from that. I think there's an element of accountability that's associated with coming to an agreement with somebody who has, a personality and a team and a company behind them. And, AI may represent, what your product can do and what it can't do, and help you find accounts that you don't know about. But for the most part, you want to optimize for getting your sellers in front of customers and having the most valuable conversation and being the most prepared for it.
Totally. Well, to wrap that up, I see a future that actually has maybe the best sellers making much more money and making more headcount for sales at companies because they're able to be more productive. Less so replacing everyone, but it seems like we're in agreement there. But
the worst sellers are at risk of replacement.
Yes, because the best are going to get that. Yeah.
If you're a generic inbound SDR that's not doing a ton of qualification or discovery, not adding a lot of value, yeah, AI is going to come for your job because that is going to be a video or a chat interface. I think that is certainly at risk, but the best selling and the ultimate expression of the craft, I think, has a place for a while.
Yeah, Kyle, I think to that point, one of the interesting things that's come up, and again, having run teams for a while, you always have this skill versus will, and I'm sure we've all had folks in the sales ranks that they're not that good, but they work their asses off. But then when they get on calls, you just hate everything they say, and it's just not great, but you keep them around because they're willing to make 1,000 calls or go hit 1,000 doors or whatever the go-to-market setup is. I do think there's going to be a fundamental shift where you can bring in higher skilled talent on the front end while being able to basically reduce the amount of manual effort that gave sales a bad name. And so we're seeing from a talent perspective, folks from industries that frankly probably wouldn't have gotten into sales 10 years ago, because if you're going to start as an SDR, you have to make the 100 calls a day, the 1,000 calls a week, get kicked in the teeth a ton just doing cold outreach. And so I think there's probably going to be this paradigm shift where, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever side of the coin you're on, that like grinder, if you will, that doesn't, they lack the eloquence, they lack the sophistication, they can't do discovery, but you keep them in the org because they work so hard. I think those folks are going to have a tough time. But I think the benefit there is that you will be able to bring on talent from, whether it's from universities or from other industries that would have walked away from sales in the past, that now with some of the AI, supplementing just the manual grind effort, that you can get a brighter, more eloquent, better salesperson. And so I do think there will be a paradigm shift there.
Totally. And shifting gears a little bit from some of the tooling side and technology to the personal side, and again going back to this, culture of excellence. Passing the mic over to you, Kyle. How do you think about, especially building, pretty much all of Owners' go-to-market team from scratch over the last few years? How do you think about kind of setting the bar and the standard for the team, and holding the team accountable to that in a positive way?
So there's a lot in this question.
Solve sales leadership for us today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it starts with hiring. If you're hiring highly motivated, driven people with a history of excellence, curiosity, coachability, and a bunch of those key DNA traits that you look for, then a lot of what happens downstream of that gets a lot easier. The thing I try to impress upon my managers is every hire that does not exceed the bar of the current team makes us worse. And it seems harsh, but it is very much true. And so you just need to go try to find A++ talent as much as you can. And obviously that's easier for me to say. We've got an exciting brand and we're growing, so we can attract that type of person. And if you're not, you have to get creative about finding diamonds in the rough that maybe don't have the resume but do have the DNA, and equipping and enabling them. So I would definitely, if you're talking about excellence and execution, it starts with a desire to do it, because it's hard, it's unsexy, and you just need a person with a certain wiring. And then it's about systems and enablement. And so the systems that you put in place need to reinforce the behaviors you want and reduce friction for everything that is positive and introduce friction for everything that's negative. If you want a highly enriched CRM, if you want people to take great notes, how do you make it easy for people to take great notes? If you want to limit the bad handoffs to your onboarding team, how do you introduce friction to make that more challenging? And this is just behavioral economics 101. It's nudge theory, but you have to imbue that into your system design, and that's your tech stack, your business process design, and then your rituals and routines, and just getting really intentional with the way your business operates. We call them our operating rhythms. It's one of my sort of 7 revenue leadership pillars. Your operating rhythms have to be designed and deployed in a way that can slowly nudge people forward towards a common goal. And a lot of that is standardization. As much as people don't like it, standardizing how your team runs a one-on-one, how they run their team weekly meeting, how you get reporting from them every week. So, every leader rolls up a weekly summary to me in a standard format, and just, having the diligence and the discipline to instrument the little things is ultimately, I think, how you get to great execution.
Totally. I'd love to get especially Matt's take on this, kind of being at similar stage, or kind of right after the stage that you're building towards, Kyle. But how do you think about prioritizing all of those different things, well, you have, that next month, that next quarter, that next year, growth goals to hit, people to hire. How do you think about the right amount of standardization and process and rigor at the earlier stages of the company versus, later?
Yeah, I'd say it's tough in the beginning. You don't have all the resources you need. Maybe you can't attract the kind of talent that you need for certain key roles. But I think if you start, to Kyle's point, in the hiring process, and you're hiring for like IQ and values, you're going to drop people into a situation where at our stage in a company, like, they can figure things out quickly. And so that clock speed is super important when everything isn't perfect or like finally settled yet. And then I think that first 90 days is super important for a sales rep. And you may be doing a million things, and that person may not even have a deal yet, but you have to create reasons to have lots of interactions for that person across the company, because that first 90 days is going to set the tempo for like what they believe their expectations are from them for the next 1 to 5 years. So I think you really got to flood the zone, make sure that they've got touch points with solution engineering and onboarding and the executive team to really make sure that the expectations are set immediately. Even, you want to be like, oh, that person doesn't have a deal yet, so why am I going to get on a call with them? But that first 90 days, I think, is super important, because there may be process changes that happen in that first 90 days at like our stage of a company, right? Oh, we re-implemented something in the CRM on like day 45 for an employee. So like getting people who have the clock speed to be able to kind of maneuver quickly and be agile, but then just, building those interpersonal relationships with your sellers early in their tenure, I think, is super important.
Totally. Yeah. It kind of comes back to, with sales, with building teams, expectation setting, and it's very hard to reset. Right. So making sure you get it from the start is a challenge. James, how do you think about this? At your global scale, across $1 billion of revenue, how do you think about the right amount of standardization when you have different geos, product lines, segments, all of those different things working at once?
Yeah, I think, just to echo both Kyle and Matt, irrespective of size or scale, I think hiring is where it all starts. And there's a handful of things that, if I think about just the amount of frontline managers that might be promoted being a manager for the first time, they don't know how to hire. And so making sure there's a standardized process of what to look for, what to sort of lose quickly on in terms of, 9 short tenures in 2 years, probably going to be the 10th. Things like, again, athletes, musicians, anything where people had to, perform at a high level. They're accustomed to getting feedback. They're accustomed to like losing, to be frank. If you're an athlete or you've lost a game or you've had to perform in any kind of, sort of competitive example, like that concept of game tape, whatever it is that you're doing, there's all these nuggets that you can find within certain individuals. So I think hiring is a huge one, and making a standard process to allow at least 90% that you're not going to let someone through that shouldn't or doesn't fit your cultural values. I think having the cultural values is a really important thing, and then embodying them. It starts to get into a little bit of the mumbo jumbo around, hey, let's sit around and create a bunch of values that we write books about. But I do think if embodied and if repeated and lived, it's a really impactful thing. On the expectations, to Matt's point, 100% agree. I think one of the things that becomes, on teams or in certain regions, if expectations aren't clear of like, what does good look like? What am I going to either be promoted for or put on a pit for? Mm-hmm. The worst thing in an organization of any size is a level of opacity around like, am I doing well? Am I not? And, we make it really, really clear, whether it's, inbound to outbound or outbound to SMB or AE to AM, any of those key milestones or key promotional jumps. Like, I think one of the things that we did here recently is we had lost that kind of trajectory, if you will, of like, what is next? And if you're in sales at any point in time, it doesn't necessarily have to be jumping into leadership or jumping to the enterprise, but you should know what is next, because what you are doing at that point is very challenging. And so making sure that that next step, whether it's compensation, whether it's a better territory, whether it's, less accounts, more accounts, however the GTM is set up, there should be kind of like a top and a bottom. And, again, back to the athlete or the performer, like, it's the concept of like, you're going to carry the water for a little while, but then you're going to work your way up, and then somebody's going to carry the water for you, whether that's an SDR pairing, whether that's the best territory. There has to be a very logical next step. And even in an org of, GTM for us is 2,000 people. In each segment, in each vertical, in each of those, there is a milestone. And I think keeping people reaching for that brass ring in combination with expectations being crystal clear of what it is you need to do in each of those, it does keep people knowing not only where they stand, but also what is next, to get to that next level of a better life or a better compensation, whatever it may be. Again, so I fully agree with both Kyle and Matt. And then I think on the last one, just in terms of, overarching culture, if you will, we have done as we've grown over the years, we've tried to keep a blueprint of what not to do. When companies get big, bureaucracy gets high, you find yourself with 15 one-on-ones a day, every day, and you kind of get separated from the action, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so we're still founder led. And so, making sure that we almost have like the anti-blueprint of like, this is what big companies do that makes them slow and bad, et cetera, et cetera. And, not to say we haven't stepped in some of the traps, but trying to avoid them as much as possible, keeping that nimbleness, keeping that, everybody's communicating in a regular way. We eliminate the bureaucrats, if you will. I think that's really important as you start to get bigger. And, as revenue leaders, this is my last piece, I'll shut up, I promise. But, managers, directors, VPs, SVPs, whatever. I think we all know that person that thinks they get to that level and now I'm done. I can sit back, I can do corporate stuff, and I'm going to help with strategy and I'm going to help with the values. And like you lose a little bit of the dirt under the fingernails. I think it's so important, irrespective of size, to make sure that every leader, all the way up to myself, our CEO, we are in there doing it as much as anybody else is doing it. I've got a calendar audit. I make sure 50% of my week every week is customer facing or prospect facing, because the further you get away from that and the more you get into the let's do a round table to create some mumbo jumbo and do corporate stuff, not only does the team start to lose faith, but then you start to get further away from the pulse of what customers are saying. And again, I think a lot of big companies go that route. And I think leaning back into some of those core principles is a really important thing.
And one of the things to double click into, around expectation setting and the career mapping, the straw that stirs the drink is the frontline manager. In any company, it's my opinion that the most important role is the frontline manager. You could give a great team to a bad manager, that team will be bad. You can give a mediocre team to a great manager, and that team was probably going to be pretty good. And where I think things break so often is a lack of leadership enablement. That's not a new point. We have lots of rep enablement, but then nobody teaches the managers how to do their job. Yeah. It's something that I'm spending a lot of my time on, codifying every part of the leadership toolkit to teach people how to do great coaching and how to interview and look for the right things, how to operate their business, how to get into deals and move with their own sales craft. What James is talking about, being on the front lines. That is the place where things degrade quickly, because a team goes from, I was managing reps when I started here. We were $2.5 million. So things don't get watered down at all. But as you introduce 3, 4, 6 lines of leadership, in James's case, it can be really difficult to make sure the commander's intent is all the way down to that frontline team. And you need amazing frontline management enablement to make that work. I think that's where the execution degrades the fastest.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That frontline manager position, like depending on how fast the company's moving, eventually they will get the team they deserve, right? And so if they're not going to be able to do that, then it's going to be a reflection of their skills and their tenacity and how enabled they are to coach people.
Totally. Well, shifting gears a bit before we wrap, because I really want to dig into maybe a less sexy part than the AI and the future of sales and how to drive execution excellence, is the process stuff, the cadence, the operational rigor, stuff kind of outside of the craft of sales. But I think even at early stage companies, let alone at later stage companies, doesn't get as much of a voice. So Matt, I know that you've focused your career a lot, and especially at SEON early days, on how do you build that operating cadence and these core processes across the team. how do you think about that? And how do you think about prioritizing that again, when there's the big next hire, when there's, that deal, the next quarter, next year goes up? How do you think about working on kind of those core kind of like infrastructure and process pieces at the company?
Yeah, I think consistency, if you've got like 2 levels of sales leadership and you're getting asked different questions about a deal by both of those, you're sort of like, what should I care about most, right? And so I think you start with like the basics. We go in and we ask everybody in my leadership team asks reps on the deal the same questions, which is like, why are they making a change? Why should it be SEON and why now? Right. And then you can start building out from there around like things like qualification and pipeline management, but that consistent voice from the leadership team, from like the CEO on down, about like what's important when we're talking to our customers. I think that's your base, and you can start building on that.
Like a shared language, right? Is the other way I've heard it. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to unify. We've got a very global team for the size company we are. We're 300 employees, but we're in Singapore, Budapest, London, Austin. And so, it's tough to get people together and get them on the same page. But that shared language about how we talk about customers and business problems is super important.
I take offense to you saying that process is not sexy, Ross.
I don't know. I feel like it's always like, the last thing. It's like, we talk about the deal. We talk about, how do we wrap up this quarter, this month really strong? And, oh, this open role. One's like, hey, let's all sit down and have the most senior. It goes to the analyst, right? And then it goes to the person that has no person. At least this is what we've seen, at Accord when people are working on this. It's like, it becomes a top level initiative. And then who owns it is never a leader. It's always, some random person off in this team, and then we're talking to them and they have no perspective on what it's actually like in the field, or what it's actually like to manage a team. And then they get this random process and they're like, this doesn't map to any of the best practice, any of the things that work. And then it kind of slowly dies. And that's, that's kind of why I say the unsexy stuff. It never feels like it gets the resources and the spotlight like some other piece of the business. So I know you're kind of an exception to that rule, Kyle.
I try to be. You got to build these things from the jump, because like I was looking up SEON before, you guys like doubled headcount in 6 months or something crazy like that. You can't go at that pace. And obviously ZoomInfo's had a crazy run. You can't grow that quickly without it all imploding, without these foundation pieces in place. And you just have to, if it's not you, if you're not the systems thinker, you need to go spend extra dollars on your RevOps partner and make sure that there's somebody around the table that can do it with you, because it's especially in today's world where systems and tooling are going to be such a compelling advantage. AI, which we're going to get to, somebody in the leadership team needs to be an expert in thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, and at our stage as a company, we centralized all operations functions into go-to-market ops. So it's, marketing and sales and success, and like have a single customer engagement methodology all the way through, from like awareness to referral status. And putting strategy into that ops function was a really strong play for us. Making them responsible for strategy enablement and the operational infrastructure. That gives you that kind of center of excellence that you really need to make sure that like people know there's one person to ask the question from. Like there's one place to go to know where this stuff lives, and then they're responsible for that repository of things. So it doesn't just go from like a PowerPoint to like a sales 411 and a set of expectations. There's like all these steps, intermediate steps that are required as far as like the infrastructure and the tooling. And to Kyle's point earlier, you got to make process easy, right? It can't just be a bunch of fields that have to get filled out in the CRM to like get to the next stage. Like it definitely has to be easy for people to do if you want to do it the right way, or they're just going to do the bare minimum, right?
Totally. We have a central team for that as well.
I think to double down on Kyle's point too, it's like an always on sexy, because, especially at a certain scale, if the process is wrong, it can blow up very quickly. And I think, in our case, this was just last year. We had a new business machine that was like the crown jewel. A lot of people gave it a lot of credit, but the machine itself, it was one of the first things when I took the role. The machine itself was set to just this high velocity SMB business. And then we'd be like, hey, what's wrong with the segment mix? And obviously SMB, it can be a very challenging place if not done right. And the whole process was set up incorrectly, where we were, new business and account management were completely bifurcated. New business was just a land. They got no upside if there was any growth on a particular deal. And so if I'm a rep in new business, and it's going to take me 6 months just to get through procurement at Cisco, and I get a small land and then some account manager gets rich off of it. Meanwhile, I can go close 10, 15K SMBs that probably aren't going to renew or might not pay. There was this gravitational pull that was all set up by the process and systems in general, comp, router, all of those things were set, purpose-built for SMB. And so fixing that process, segmenting the business, like doing that unsexy work has allowed us to change and fundamentally shift our segment mix. And so I think it's hugely important. And I think if it's not your superpower as a revenue leader, absolutely go spend money to hire people whose it is. But I do think from the traditional sales leader, that's the locker room, hey, I'm going to get on a deal with you, all that kind of stuff, there has to be a big emphasis put on how the machine is actually set up, or else, again, regardless of size or what stage you're at, it might be working, macro might be in your favor, but the music stops very quickly if those processes are wrong. And then I think to the just overall sales processes, I think, again, methodology, super important. I think that is an area that we say AI having a big impact, where if you think about all the things that traditional poobah CROs would come in with, it's account plans, it's medic, it's force management, it's sales, they come in, they spend a ton of money on those things. And it's like every rep hates it because all it means, it sounds great on
it's just more inspection, right? It's just like fill out more fields.
Busy work. It's like, oh, I got to have this account plan. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pencil whip it just so it shows a checkbox in CRM. Or if it's, in a sales methodology, now there's just more shit I have to fill out. And so I think AI, what's really helpful is with conversational intelligence tools, with all of the AI functions, you can basically automate a sales methodology. You can automate account plans. I think that is one of the biggest unlocks. Again, just democratizing what the best reps did to that lower tier reps. All that stuff is a lot easier, but it is still unbelievably necessary.
Totally. And I think it's kind of funny with this group of leaders. And again, not, just having VPs of sales, but CROs and, Matt with president, like having that whole customer journey and the marketing part, I think is so important. I saw this, at companies I was at before, and when we work with folks at Accord, there's such a gap between the top of funnel, the sales execution, and then what happens to customers after. And I feel like there's this really big shift back to that whole customer journey and life cycle. That's got us really excited. I feel like that's just, hey, people are looking at their bills these days. Oh shit, maybe we should care about what happens after we sign a deal that doesn't just renew and grow, and headcount grows over the last 5 or 10 years. So I think we're seeing a really big shift back to, the importance of process, because it's harder to do across teams than just for your sellers or just the CSMs. So that's been really cool to see. Well, maybe to wrap, maybe we'll do the converse. We've talked a lot about best practices, maybe some of the mistakes that you've made that you can maybe help some other people avoid when it comes to, building a culture of excellence and some of the go-to-market, people and process stuff that we've talked about. I'll try to start with one, not just asking you to put yourselves out there. One that comes top of mind is this kind of a classic thing, like the right people for the right role, and thinking about the different segments. I've seen some people be incredibly successful in the SMB world and think the future is, an enterprise and hasn't been successful there, or an amazing seller that for some reason the company makes it seem like you need to be a manager or leader to be a top performer at the company, and forcing them into those roles. And thinking about, how can someone be excellent at their craft as an SDR for a long time, as a seller, as even a frontline manager. So that's kind of one mistake that I've definitely made that stands out to me. But if there's any kind of learnings like that you can share with your past selves out there listening, would love to hear them. Maybe we'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think, when your best sellers are asking you questions, right, it's because things aren't clear enough, so I think like really having a pulse on whether it's pricing or packaging or competitive, that you do get into those places where maybe the playbook kind of like runs out of gas, right? And I think you need to really identify what those things are by having conversations with your best sellers, right? They know where they're going to run into objections. They know when they're going to get stuck. And so you do want to kind of start small with process and kind of build off on it, but you'd have to iterate, and very quickly. and that feedback from your best sellers. Like if they're asking you a question or they're coming to me or Nick or somebody on my leadership team, it's because we haven't made it clear enough what the right thing to do is, right? And we haven't developed a point of view on what the expectations are yet. And I think I've been slow a few times to kind of make that change, and you try and do the thing that takes a quarter and a month and the thing that takes a month and a week when you're moving really fast, but you just really need that feedback loop, especially when you're rethinking kind of, like James said, kind of the machine, like how does that operate? How have we planned territories? How have we, what does our inbound lead routing look like? Sometimes things break and you got to move very quickly. And most of the time your best sellers are going to be the ones that call it out because they're super high performers and anything that gets in their way is really going to ruffle their feathers.
And there's a Goldilocks point there between not enough information and way too much information. We're struggling with this now, is we feel like we've documented a lot, but then people don't know what's in the documentation, like our rules of engagement, for example. It's like, okay, so we've over documented. Now we need to simplify and communicate. It's a tough balance to strike.
Like we didn't read Appendix E on the 17th page of this thing where it was really clear. Okay, yeah. Competitor information, big, awesome competitor battle cards, but do people really have all of that? I think it's a great call out by Matt. Awesome. James, to round it out.
I mean, a lot of mistakes over the years, so this could be a while. But no, I think one of the biggest, and it's kind of a twofer, understanding early on that not all sales reps, not all teams are wired the same. You can hire for the right things, and that's great, but early learning lesson. I remember when I took over my first sales team and I told everybody to do what I had done. And there's this we were a very technical sale, and I was like, oh, this is how I did it. You should do it like this. And this guy was, brilliant. Guy could basically build a data center. And I heard him on a call trying to do what I was telling him to do. And it was just not his forte, very different approaches where he was far more technical than I was. And so I think that has stayed with me in terms of not all reps have the same strengths. And I think being able to build out a rounded out team and really leaning into what makes them great at their particular craft, whether it's rapport building and networking, highly technical, great at discovery. Everybody has these superpowers. And I think on the flip side of that coin is also knowing that not everybody is wired the same in terms of what motivates them. That was another big learning, where you have comp, you have title, you have work-life balance, you have promotion, all of these different things. One of the big mistakes early is I thought everybody was motivated like I was. And I think I've got folks on my team that basically allocate their entire equity grants or their entire, merit bonus to their teams because the money is whether they have a trust fund or whether they just don't care about money. I think assuming what somebody cares about is a huge mistake. And so knowing not only what their skill sets are and what makes them great or what can make them great at what they do, and then leaning into that from an enablement and a training standpoint. And it's not just do as I do, to Kyle's point on the frontline manager. It's the biggest mistake I see in every frontline manager is this is how I was successful. This is how you need to be successful. Big mistake. And then again, just taking the time to understand what makes your team, your directs, their directs tick, and creating that pathway of hey, you hit the expectations. These are the things. It's not always getting promoted to enterprise. It could be, I want to take my kids to school every day and I want to be able to work remote. Understanding what those key things are, I think drives that culture of excellence to drive everybody to do their best work versus, hey, $500 spiff, everybody should care about that. I think that's a mistake we see quite often.
Yeah, no, those are great calls.
Go for it. A last one to round it out, because I don't want to just agree with Matt's. And there's an important one here that I think is a message for all those sales leaders. Was not the biggest mistake I made in the early innings of my career, especially as I transitioned to tech, was not paying enough attention to post-sale. And it wasn't until I had to spin up that team for the first time, and I was sitting there with my own issues now in my palms in terms of misset expectations and poor handoff. I think that's something that we continue to get wrong. I tried to pivot hard towards being the most holistically minded revenue leader I could, but I see this all the time. I talk to, all the founders I work with. One of the first problems that we diagnose for a, a larger company, say they're like 10 million ARR and beyond, is deal quality, expectations, and handoff. Is that done really well? Because the cost of sales has continued to rise. It is such a competitive market. AI makes it easier than ever to spin up a new product, a new company. And we need to be more mindful than ever of the post-sales experience, investing dollars and headcount into those teams as leaders, and then as managers, getting your team oriented around deal quality, customer experience. That is still something I see is missing all the time. And again, it comes down to the frontline manager. Are your frontline managers bought into that? Are they reinforcing that message? Does your comp plan reinforce it? What is the friction and fuel you're using to guide people down the right path? I think that is a lesson that I wish I had learned much earlier than I did.
Yeah, I would say +1 to that. I think so many folks start in new business, and so it's all just about getting signatures, and then it's somebody else's problem. And then typically as you rise through the ranks, you take on account management, you take on CX, and you're like, oh my God, what did I do over the last year? So yeah, great point.
Awesome. Well, we'll let you guys get back to it again. You have a million things going on, and this was awesome. I have a lot of good takeaways for myself as a leader and for our team, and hopefully folks there listening in right now do as well. But yeah, Matt, Kyle, James, thanks so much for taking time out of the busy schedules to share some of these learnings with the community.
Yeah, thanks, Ross.